Hi, Rachel.
How are you?
Oh, I've been on quite the adventure. Quite the adventure. I'm feeling rejuvenated. I feel like I've gone through quite a revelation. How about yourself?
I feel like I'm going through more of a metamorphosis.
Ooh, what are you going to change into? Let's just throw Chrysalis in there too, just so we can check that off. But Rachel, we are back here exploring the Expanse because we have read one of the books.
Yes. We finished the audiobook of Abaddon's Gate.
Abaddon's Gate, Abaddon's Gate, whichever pronunciation people want to use for it. But we are Yum Yum Podcast because we're always making sure that you know that moment from Star Trek Discovery did happen. And it was an absurd moment, a sexy moment, a hilarious moment. We laughed, we cried, we felt aroused by it.
No.
And we like to review pieces of sci-fi. And we did The Expanse, the show, as first-timers. And we went, hey, let's go to that source material, see how much it adds up, see what was changed, and just get a general vibe of the thing, because The Expanse was the first thing we've done that has a source material, so why not give that a look afterwards? And we have made it up to the third book of The Expanse, and let's just get talking about it. Rachel, what is the Goodreads description of Abaddon's Gate?
For generations, the solar system, Mars, the moon, the asteroid belt, was humanity's great frontier. The alien artifact, working through its program under the clouds of Venus, has emerged to build a massive structure outside the orbit of Uranus, a gate that leads into a starless dark. Jim Holden and the crew of the Rocinante are part of a vast flotilla of scientific and military ships going out to examine the artifact. But behind the scenes, a complex plot is unfolding, with the destruction of Holden at its core. As the emissaries of the human race try to find whether the gate is an opportunity or a threat, the greatest danger is the one they brought with them.
Let's get this out of the way. This is definitely one of the books that I have been the most interested in getting to, because it was compressed in the series. We got this story told in 6 or 7 episodes because of the show's cancellation in season 3, so they just did a speed run through it, and it's in that era of the show that we found to be the highest point of The Expanse. So what was the book like? I was very curious to see this story told in full, because in all honesty, there was a rushed quality to it in the show, but it did feel complete. It did feel like a proper story.
It felt truncated, but not like... Yeah, you were skipping over things, but it didn't feel like you were missing out on anything crucial.
It wasn't a compromised tale in the end, but what was the book like? Well, Rachel, what are your overall general thoughts on this one?
I really enjoyed this one. I felt like there was a good balance between the different plots and going back and forth between the different POVs. And it was very clear why we were moving from one place to another. It felt like it had a lot more confidence in itself.
This is my favorite of the ones we have read so far. The jump in quality is quite staggering. As an overall story, I enjoyed it as well, not just looking at it in the framework of this book series or in relation to the TV show, but as its own book, as its own yarn. I enjoyed it very much. A major thing that stood out to me was that juvenile quality that we noted down in the first two books was largely absent here. And if it was there, it was far more implemented for the comedic sensibilities rather than just being a part of the DNA of the writing. It was really lacking here, and I found that to be good overall. I think that there's a maturity to how this story is told. We talk about this in the previous discussions of the books, that there's clearly an ambition that they're trying to fulfill as writers, and I think that they've figured it out very much so here. I felt the stakes, I felt the peril, I felt the existential dread, the ideological, philosophical, and theological discussion points felt fully realized and genuine, and I like this one a lot. This is definitely the standout, and I hope that we keep following on this trajectory overall.
The description started with the ring, so let's start there. What did you think of the introduction of the ring and the explanation of the technology?
It was nice that at the beginning we had all of the different media junket reactions to its existence and to what happened with Protogen in the previous books, and having these talking head debates and discussions, and then we are following our set of characters as they are inevitably drawn to the ring, whether it's from personal desire, whether it's from ambition, whether it's for a quest of revenge, or because of some nebulous outside thing that's forcing them to go.
It's got potential for all of these characters in different ways, and that makes it way more interesting rather than just being like, cool space thing.
What I really like about The Ring is two things. It does a marvelous job of being an embodiment of the mysterious, of the unknown. Yet you recognize some of it. Holden talks about this in some of his chapters, of it being like a microwave and we're a monkey and we don't understand what it is, but we do on some primal level, but we haven't figured it out. That's great, but I also like that it's a hub location that narrows down the scale of our story. So instead of planet hopping or ship, like, we're just mainly ship hopping, and they're all confined to the ring space. So every action a character takes matters because it will have a ripple effect that will affect another character, even if they're on another ship inside of the ring. So it has a confined quality, yet we're in outer space, and it's a pocket dimension. It's really wonderful in that way. What did you think of it?
Oh yeah, it was very well executed, and it was very clearly defined what all of those things were and what they were doing. And it feels weirdly more grounded being based in the ships.
Mm-hmm. And there's a linear progression of things. This belter flies into it, it activates this. Okay, that's now go time for this domino piece to fall, and as we keep going, we just have the next problem, the next problem, the next problem, but they all bleed into each other. There's just a very, again, succinct method to this sci-fi location bringing about the drama, which I greatly appreciated. And what did you feel about, in terms of The Ring, that lore, world building beyond the comprehension of our characters' stuff? Because that's always bleeding through every single story, and obviously it has major peaks with certain characters like Holden. But how did you feel about it in terms of how the book detailed it? Because obviously in the show we have a visual representation as well, but what did you feel about it in the written form?
It was interesting to see the way that they came at it, because in the show, it often feels like we don't have time to question this. But since we're in the heads of all of these characters, we do get some of them like questioning, like, what does this mean? What does this look like? And it was nice to have those moments of reflection throughout the whole book.
I also found it, I guess, let's just say, a choice to be made that when they get inside of the ring, there's a lot there to already be deduced or answered, like the gates. There's gates already there, like they can see them. And so the characters deduce, oh, this is like a Stargate type of hub point, and there's the station, the nucleus, the thing in the middle, and that's going to be like the central intelligence. Like a lot of the mystique of it is already pulled out from underneath you at the very beginning. Like it's very nuts and bolts of what the ring's function is, while still having enough runway for the characters, especially James Holden, to still tinker around and find out specific details while leaving things vague enough for future installments.
Yeah, and it keeps on opening up more possibilities in terms of the story itself, which is an interesting sort of reflection of what the characters are going through.
I appreciated too where we picked up with the Rocinante crew after where they were in the previous book, after doing all of this heroics, and they were whining and dining at the UN, and now here they are just taking odd jobs and scratching around for money, and they're not friends with certain people, but they are friends with others, and the repercussions of their actions from the previous stories coming to bite them and forcing them to engage with the story that Holden is trying to avoid, which is Miller is calling to him to go to the ring, basically, and he's like, I'm not going to do that, but because of the actions in the previous books coming up the way that they do, he has to.
He's protagonist, man. Caught in the trap again.
And what's the trap this time?
The trap is they've stumbled into a situation and immediately kind of fucked it up.
But you've also got to...
Well,
go on.
To be fair, he gets fucked over, and just like in the show, he's the first to successfully go through the ring.
Because of all of these extenuating circumstances.
And then he's just kind of doing his best to figure out how can they succeed in this situation and, not kill everybody.
And it goes into this running theme of destiny, fate, choice. There's a theological and spiritual bent to this particular book, and Holden is wondering, does he have any autonomy here? I like the setup, though, where they get served by the Martian government for having stolen the ship in the first place, and Holden is forced to do this because he's getting sued to oblivion and they need the money, and the documentary crew boards, and they're like, we're going to fund you a bit, but You need to go to that ring. We need you to go there. There's a story to be told, motherfucker. You're James Holden. Did you know that? I love Monica in this book was really fun. She was pretty much on point with how we saw her in the show, except for less like manipulative, I would say.
Sleazy.
She was less sleazy in comparison to what she was in season 3.
It is also refreshing that Holden has such limited agency in this book in a way, because it is Melba / Clarissa / Peaches that is really driving the plot. Her quest for revenge caused so much of what happens to happen.
I mean, that's the thing that is traditional. The family of a former foe after revenge performs a Machiavellian trap that spirals out into all of these ways, and she, Melba / Clarissa, has to keep coming up with solutions to her evil ploy. But the moral quandary of how much can I degrade myself starts to eat away at her. Like, how much of my morality and soul can I relinquish? I mean, that is something, though. This was a remedy to what we discussed in the previous 2 books, which is a lack of a villain focus. She's an antagonist. She's the primary antagonist. She's one of the primary antagonists, and she is a POV character too.
And it is fascinating to see things from her point of view and really experience things through her, because we know that she's not a reliable protagonist in a way, because it's not like she's lying about what's happening. It's just we are witness to her lying to herself.
This also brings at the forefront of this particular one, in comparison to the other 2 in the Expanse book series, a personal edge to the story. Because it's a vendetta. They are not on the back foot because of some corporate corruption that has nothing to do with them, and yet they've been ensnared in it because you know how it is. The capitalist agenda gets us all in the end, or political corruption by some bureaucrat on Earth, and now it's splashed back on us. No, this is someone going out of their way to fuck them, to destroy them, to disgrace them. And we put a face and a name and a person to that. In the other 2 books, there's no emotional connection to the conflicts happening. They're more something that you stroke your chin about and think on a grand scale. But this one, because we have revenge as a central as a central point of the story, this has, throughout it all, whether it be the characters themselves or the themes or what drives the plot, it's much more personal.
And it does create a interesting experience. And it was one that we were more prepared for, having watched the show. We were expecting to get POV from Clarissa.
I was surprised that they told us it was Clarissa Mao straight away.
Yes.
I thought they were going to keep it being Melba, POV Melba, who is... No, from sentence 1, they tell you, this is Clarissa Mao, and she's here to do revenge. That is something that I don't mind, but it does throw me for a loop that so often in the books, they don't want to shroud things in that kind of intrigue, and keeping things hidden and then reveal. They just tell you right up front, and we have the information, and now we're going to see
that's
it play
not
out.
the interesting part. Here's the interesting part.
The Behemoth, or formerly the Nauvoo, is also a major part of the plot in this. We get a lot of Belter and OPA politics that form from it, but also since the Nauvoo was, a religious symbol at one time that's now been co-opted by other people, it serves as a great metaphor throughout the whole story about the human condition and how we pervert things, or how we perhaps change them for something greater, something better, because that's like a major tug of war, especially between someone like Cortez and someone like Anna, where they are constantly locking horns about similar ideas. And I thought the Behemoth was like a great physical representation of that thing that we have large discussions about throughout the entire book.
That is a really good way of framing it. And I feel like I'm going to have more to say about the Behemoth stuff when we compare it to the show later on. It is a really solid plot. I will kind of reinforce that. I want to know if you felt the threat of the proto-molecule itself.
This is a great thing to ask about, because in the previous ones, especially in Leviathan Wakes, the proto-molecule is seen as a threat, seen as a weapon, seen as this horrible agent of destruction and chaos, and we just don't understand it. I think this one does a very, matter-of-fact, just nuts and bolts breakdown that it isn't any of those things. It is just a piece of technology that serves a very specific function, and every time we think we understand it, we don't understand it, and it's humans that are the problems.
It would just be arrogant to think that we understood, but we keep on doing it as a species. It's just like, no.
And when we don't understand it, we fear it or we get angry.
And that's what the investigator tells Holden, basically, at several points.
Well, the investigator, we don't call him the investigator in this, he's just like Miller. He takes that from Holden's brain. Like, Holden already is thinking this, and Holden is Mr. Hey, I didn't say that out loud. And then Miller just, does the pinky finger on his cheek, twisting it, going, oh, geez, I did take it from your brain. At least let's give Holden some credit in this book. He doesn't have a lot of agency, but he does have a lot of time to think about the state of the universe at large and our responsibilities in it.
And it's fun seeing him sort of buck up against those constraints, but also kind of be glad that he isn't in more control.
How do you feel about the proto-molecule in this?
I'm still intrigued by it, but it feels secondary in a way, because even though it's made the rings, it's made the station, it's made the slow zone, it's like those are the things that we're focusing on more than the proto-molecule itself.
I think the proto-molecule works better when it is this just background hum, instead of here we are fighting a monster, oh no, here we are running away from a plague. This is probably, in the books and thinking about the show, my favorite use of the proto-molecule is this conflict, and how it is just the environment. The whole thing is, this is the proto-molecule and the builders. This is just the environment, and our characters are stuck in it.
It's fascinating that it explores, pardon the pun, but it is exploring the expanse of this world through confinement. It's a nice contrast that leads to a lot of interesting moments and dynamics.
And yet we get the beauty that a lot of the fear brought about by this confinement is the fact that it will make things bigger. Because Cortez and some other characters are worried about humanity getting access to the proto-molecule and to the ring space and being able to spread out and just cause further harm and or just further not understanding what's around them currently and bringing in this like God element to it. So there's the confinement, but also the fact like, no, we are scared because we just realized we're even smaller in the universe.
We're insignificant. And to think otherwise is foolish.
Let's talk about the characters. Let's go through them. How about we just talk about the Rossi crew outside of Holden, because they get much less to do. Like, they get stuff to do, but they're not as significant in my mind.
Yeah. Holden's there. Naomi almost gets killed. Amos doesn't get really much at all, and neither does Alex.
Amos is like
Alex
muscle.
gets his shit joke at the end.
Oh, his joke about farts and shit. Well, let's talk about Alex, because he's always the one with the least amount. I enjoyed him a lot in this book. He was a suitable comedic relief.
Levity. He brings a lot of levity, which is nice.
And he is the character that helps ground things, because when he takes things seriously, it means something, because he's such a devil-may-care character. So he's the one that makes Holden reluctantly be able to forgive Clarissa Mao, or at least not hold things against her. Because he's the one that makes a joke about like, oh yeah, Holden, must be real tough for you to forgive her, right, Naomi? Just, there's Naomi and she's already forgiven Clarissa. It's like, okay. Your boy Amos, though, he does stuff. He has his moments. Come on, he dealt with the blind guy.
Yeah, he's like, I thought I would have more reservations.
More what, sorry?
Reservations.
Oh, yes, about hurting this blind man.
But, now I'm here to heaven. What a nice surprise.
I think my favorite Amos stuff was him teamed up with Anna, calling her Red because she's got red hair in this, and them becoming friends and her hugging him and just coming to terms with the fact that there can be monsters. Like, there are just unfeeling, amoral killers out there, and how does that square with her sense of morality and where she places people in her viewpoints? So he's Amos. He goes against everything I hold dear, and yet I like him.
But I like all of them. And it's a little bit weird to say and think about, but I don't feel like they're missing out on anything by not having more. Like, sometimes we feel in the show, it's just like you have these characters and they're not really doing anything or saying anything or wanting anything.
I felt it with Naomi in this book. Like, she has stuff. Her main big thing, as you said, is she gets attacked by Clarissa. And she gets to obviously survive, but she's badly injured. And she forgives, or at least is able to accept who Clarissa Mao is, because Naomi just cannot hold on to that type of, anger anymore in her life. And I can see a defense of how Naomi is done in this, because a lot of her stuff is mysterious. Like, it goes back to the intrigue. Like, Naomi is an intriguing character because there's clearly stuff in her background that we don't know, but you hope will come to light that helps this type of characterization add up, but I don't know. I still find that Naomi oftentimes is just the girl. If you know what I mean. I don't know if you feel similar or not. Like, I feel like she's a bit token in the story a lot. Like, she's the loving woman.
And she's Holden's +1 a bunch.
I preferred it when, like, she's fighting Clarissa Mao and she's more prioritized about, like, you're not hurting my ship. And Clarissa's, I want to kill your boyfriend. And she's like, you're not hurting my ship, you motherfucker. Fuck you. I hate you.
Holden
you don't touch
can
the
protect
ship.
Himself.
Holden's fine.
But
you're
Rossi's mine.
You're not touching my Rossi. You're not touching the like. That's the Naomi I like. I like the grease monkey, the mechanic Naomi more than like the empathetic girlfriend version. Hey, we don't care for the romance still, huh? Or do you? Do you prefer the romance in the?
I prefer it, but
really,
I prefer it here than in the show. Because I do buy that they're in a relationship and that Holden is absolutely smitten with Naomi. I believe that. I don't feel it.
I felt it with one thing in here, but
I don't. Yeah. I don't feel it consistently. But when they have those moments where Holden's just like, I just want her. I just want to know that she's safe. I just want to know her. Like those moments, I bought and I felt the longing that he has and that desire, deep desire to protect her.
I am thankful that they jumped straight into the acknowledgement that he's a shitty guy. Holden, like as a boyfriend, because they have the I love you moment here, and it's 10 times better than when they did it in the show.
Hands down!
1,000,000% better.
Down.
And a part of it is what I loved about their relationship, as did you, in the final season of the series, which is there was an acknowledgement of the flaws of their relationship in a very frank and honest and quiet way. And that was here in this book. It came up multiple times, but especially in that moment where he was going to say like, oh, I've liked you since the day I met you. And he's like, no, I didn't. That's not true. I thought of her as a thing. Like, I'm not a good person. Like, I'm a shitty guy. And like, do I love her now? Or do I think that she's just hot? Like, I liked how they came to terms with the fact that our main character is just a horny dude, bro. And it actually was not just lampshading. Like, it didn't feel to me that they just have a, hey, we acknowledged it so we can get away with it or anything. Like, it actually felt like he grew and is developing as a person. So when he does have the moment where he says, I love you to Naomi, it matters. It actually made me feel their relationship. It actually was the point in the book in which I worried that Holden or Naomi wouldn't make it out, even though I know they are going to make it out. Because that's the thing that, you know, you always talk about of like, oh, there's no actual weight to the peril here because I know that they're the heroes and they're going to get out of there. But if you can at least ground something in an emotional core like what I'm saying, it can help alleviate that thing. And it did for me in this one moment where I know how it's all going to play out because I've seen the show. I still felt it when it's like, oh, I love you and I love you too. It's like, oh, shit, one of them could die right now. Like it happened. So, like, I still have problems with book Naomi. I just think she's too, I don't know, she just doesn't have that grit that she did in the show as much as I was hoping.
Yeah, it is interesting how, like, it's smoothed out in certain ways. Where, like, her identity as a belter feels different here.
I just can't get past my one defining trait about Naomi is she's nice. Like,
she's a good person, and
she's the empathetic woman. While in the show, she was allowed to be messy. She was allowed to be more of a fuck up and a prick.
Was it this
as much as we bitched about in season 2, she was a kind of an asshole at points, and I kind of missed that about Naomi. I kind of miss like some pushback from her more, or like something a little bit more ridged up.
Was it in this book that we had people being like, well, Holden can't be that bad because Naomi's good and she likes him?
Yeah, we had that. Yeah. And it's true. James Holden, we've been talking about him already, but he is the protagonist, man, and you said that in a way he lacks a lot of agency. He's kind of pushed from place to place. So talk to us about Holden. How do you feel about him?
Oh, book Holden. You know that you're a piece of shit. And that's way more interesting. Because, like, his stuff is way more interesting because of that awareness and the way that he is sort of trying to figure out if his choices are coming from that place, a good place, or somewhere else. And the dilemmas that he is thinking his way through and understanding that and where he is and how the experiences that we've seen have continued to change him. It's not like the effects of this first book have stopped because the stuff in the second book happened. It's just like everything is continuing to matter for Holden, and he's still just trying to find the next best step. He has no grand plans, and it's hilarious that he's in the center of everything in this universe, and that he's just like, I wanted to be special.
But also I don't want to be special. He wants it both ways. I have to admit that I found him incredibly dull in this book.
He's like one of the least interesting
He's the least
parts.
He's definitely the least interesting POV character that we get.
Oh yeah,
hands down.
No questions.
And I wonder, in all fairness to him, a lot of it's undercut because we have seen the show, so we already know the plot things he is discovering. So because his story majorly is about discovery. It's about like I have stumbled across
the problem. The rings.
Yeah, and I've been told this from Miller. Oh, I know what this means. Oh, this. So maybe a lot of that is washed away in comparison to if I read it for the first time. But it goes back into he's a vessel for this to happen. But I want to give some praise though, because as a character in the first book, he is Mr. I don't want any responsibility. I'm here. I'm going to listen to everyone else's needs, but I don't really understand them. I'm just going to charm my way through, until Miller fucks with him by just being too different to him. That was good. Second book, very much about getting into his psyche in terms of his moral descent and how much of his ethics that he's always defined himself have changed. This one, we get to know who Holden is in terms of what does he think about things on a philosophical level.
It is interesting how the philosophical stuff has continued to evolve in each of the books, but Holden is at the center of that exploration in these different ways because he's finding himself in these different situations and he's feeling differently about each of them. And I appreciate that the book didn't make us feel the way that this series did, which is that Holden was an obligation. He's here and he's the least interesting thing, but they are doing stuff with him.
Yes, they are. I wish he had a bit more of the humor that we got in the show with him. at this stage of it, because I did find his chapters particularly dry. Like, they were just lacking something or other. Like, there's a lot to think about, like how he keeps comparing himself to Miller throughout these stories. Since Miller's gone now, here is Miller, worrying about being a tool of manipulation for some dead alien race. What are we? Are we just monkeys smacking at a microwave? All of that is there. I actually thought the most interesting moment for him was holding anger against Clarissa Mao. Like, and it's such a short thing because it is robbed from him. Like everyone, like we said, everyone says you need to stop feeling that way. But I actually thought that was the most, like, awesome thing he got in the book, because I was actually taken aback that he was holding that attitude, because he's James Holden. Like, I thought I had more of a grip on who he was, but when he was like very vitriolic in how he felt about Clarissa Mao, it made me do a double take. But also, I was kind of relieved because it's a classic. If that was me, I would feel that way.
It's valid and it's not at the same time. Like, they really keep pointing out that Holden doesn't get to hold a grudge because Naomi doesn't. It's just like, no, he kind of has a right to have his own feelings, but he doesn't get to decide things.
We get the best character, Anna, in this book, and outside of obviously the stuff they added for her in season 3 with Erin Wright and being a political speech writer, there's not much different about Anna's characterization overall. Like, she's pretty much 1-to-1 in terms of characterization. Like, oh, she's redheaded in this and she's got a thick Russian accent. But like, other than that, like, there's not too much different. And
her characteristics remain the same, even if her features are altered.
Yeah, I loved Anna though. I loved her in the book. I loved her in the show. I liked how, because we get in written form and we're doing the POV, we got a lot more of what I particularly adored about her was, remember in the series, we actually don't get this scene. We actually don't really get this scene in the book, but in the series, it's like a defining moment for Anna when she goes to visit Clarissa Mao after she's been locked up, and she's just like, I just wanted to look at you and recognize you as a person, and I care about everyone, and it's tiring, but I don't care about you. Like, that whole scene, we get a lot more of that type of duality to Anna, where she's trying to be nice to all of these people, but we get to hear her thoughts about them and how it's not like she hates anyone in particular, but it's more she's fallible, she's human, she holds these, you know, these little microaggressions or like these disdains for people or just differences of opinion. Like Tilly, for instance. Tilly's like her best friend in this book, and yet she still doesn't really like her very much.
Yeah, and it's just like, she kind of held me captive, and now she's my friend, and I keep her now.
I love Anna, but how did you feel about her? Because we both knew that she was going to be here. There was an excitement there, but what was your experiences with the book version of Anna Volovodov?
It was interesting how similar it was. While, like, for us, it was adding lots of new things to her, and things that she got to do and things that she got to see. But it still felt like it fit into my schema of Anna from the show.
One thing that it's always interesting, isn't it? Where in my mind, the show front-loaded the kind of shitty things she does and guilt she feels for abandoning her family to go on this quest of glory. In the book, it's kind of more at the back end of it, especially in the epilogue, where it's like,
she's like, oh shit, I did it again.
But maybe I was supposed to be there, because if I wasn't there, maybe things would have gone bad. And just the classic, you never apologize. Like you it's easier for you to apologize after you've done the thing rather than not do it.
Asking for forgiveness rather than permission.
Rather than permission. Like that's Anna's MO. Any other things you want to say about like Anna? Because, very, very quick opinions from you overall, but she's like a huge part of this book.
Oh, yeah, she's central and very important and interesting, and it's very key that she is here and has a perspective that she has for a number of the themes that the book is exploring.
I liked the day-to-day detailings of being a religious leader that we got with Anna, whether it was from the beginning where she's dealing with like this abusive husband, or when she's on the flotilla and she's having to interact with people like Cortez, where it's like you're smiling at each other nicely, but you don't really respect or get on with each other, or they're of a different faith like the Mormons, but really we get on with these certain talking points. What was that?
You really liked that moment where she was just like, so the Mormons and I, like the Methodists, get along because we agree on these things, even though we fundamentally disagree on all of these other really important things.
Because, it's a funny observation, because it's just the way she details it is very humorous, but what I love about that and what I love about what Anna brings to this is something that makes me think of Babylon 5, which is like this deep respect for faith and religions while still being able to criticize them. The Mormons in the previous books are a joke. Like, haha, they're in space because they're capitalistic. Oh, haha. And in this one, they're not even really here, but we get the Methodists and the Catholics and this and this and this and all of these faiths. And they're talked about in both very positive framing ways and also not afraid to show them to be just flawed. They're humans like Anna. She's this perfect paragon of virtues and she's like this wonderful Methodist spiritual leader, but also she's feeling bad and trying to force redemption and forgiveness through people who don't want to. And she's doing it because she wants to make herself feel better for the choices she made. Like that moment where she meets Clarissa, Melba, where she gets told off by Melba being like, you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. That was a huge moment for Anna in the book because it's like, oh, we actually get to see someone like reject her overstepping her bounds.
Yeah, everybody else is accepting and tolerant. Melba has no fucking time for it. I wasn't expecting to have so much fun with Melba and Clarissa. Even the small touch of her chapters sometimes being titled, like, throughout the book, it changes between Clarissa and Melba.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice touch that just reflects what's going on in her psyche at these different points. And even though we don't get her watching it and being like, fucking donut. We get a very similar sort of moment of her like trying to remind herself why she's on this path of revenge and why she fucking hates Holden. But it's not quite as funny as that in the show.
Yeah, in comparison to what the show does, yeah. They do this, they really, really go in on this very id primal thing in the book. Like they had it in the others, but they're really going hard in of just like we have these versions of ourselves in our brain, like how Miller did in the first book where he was like Miller and then he was the investigator, right? Like he would flip those switches on and off all of the time. And we have that with Clarissa with being Melba. Like, Melba is this ideal version of who she should be. Like, a person of the people, someone who's capable of bonding with others, being a part of a family is her thing. Like, this repair crew family, like, she's got a community, but as Clarissa Mao, she was isolated and alone, and she just wanted to be loved, wanted to be seen, but never happened. But we get like this, you hate it, I know, still, the hindbrain thing is still in these books, but they used it in a way that felt like it actually mattered here. Like, Holden used it occasionally, but it was mainly Clarissa Mao who used the hindbrain stuff. But what were your overall takes and reactions to how the book, especially through Clarissa/Melba, had that be a storytelling angle of just like this idea, like there are these versions of ourselves, but deep down we have like these primal cavemen, like lash, almost animalistic thing inside.
I keep on returning to this phrase when we're talking about this book, but it's true in a lot of the different aspects of, like, it's interesting. And it's dynamic in the way that it explores a lot of things, like this sort of aspect of your true self and versions of yourself, and how you perceive yourself and what that makes you do.
Are we just animals? Is that all we are? Because that's something that we see in the book constantly be argued against. Like, are we just pretending like we're any different, but when push comes to shove, we will just eat each other, Like, that's what we see with Clarissa. She's constantly wondering, like, which side should she give into, like, which facade works for her. Anna obviously doesn't believe in any of that stuff, but she sees the worst of humanity, and it shakes her to her core. Like, she saw all these people die, but the thing that really rattled her was she saw another person murder someone and then move on. Like, that's what really got, like, Anna.
Yeah. That was what shook her to the core. And it's interesting that we see a lot of different people's POV when it comes to that particular incident, and the way that Anna reacts to it, and the way that Clarissa sort of wishes that she reacted to it.
I thought a character that was a very fascinating person to plug into this discussion point was Bull. Because Bull, oddly enough, he has a name that is a reference to an animal. That's fun. But since he's the security chief, he views people in a very specific way. Like, he views them as assets, or he views them as threats, or he views them as, like, opportunities. But he also is that person who has a very pragmatic point of view of just like, hey, when the chips are down, people are going to fall into these tribes, into these camps, into these motives, and we have to deal with that on a logistic level. Like, that's a fascinating thing about Bull, is he very much is someone who understands this kind of id-driven, fear-driven psyche that we can fall into. But what he falls into in response to that is a very, like, logical, pragmatic, and, like, logistic-based response to it. Like, oh, this is happening? Well, I'm going to lock that shit down, and I'm going to sort it out, and I'm going to make the status quo come back somehow.
A lot of our characters are struggling for control over their lives and what's going to happen with these rings in the future of humanity, and trying to do what they think is best.
We had a version of this in the show. We had a character named Bull who was a security chief, but basically
that was later.
Other than he has a slight bigotry towards Belters, is a security chief and knows Fred Johnson, and is an Earther.
Oh, yeah.
There's no similarities to the character that's in the book.
Yeah.
Like,
basically
again, different.
A bunch of this stuff will probably fit more naturally when we're doing comparisons. But I thought that Bull was a really solid and empathetic character. I was just a bit like, okay, when he died, just because of the way that it's sort of done in the middle of the climax and he's resigned to his death.
That was actually one of my highlights of the book, his death. I thought it was very, very well done. It was
great, but it didn't have that emotional core for you? Yeah. I was just like, oh, he's doing the thing that he thought that he was going to have to do, and he is following through, and he's doing it, and that's really true to him.
Yeah. I felt sad on the level of a fun character's no longer going to be here.
It's like, oh, he's gone.
The book version of Bull, I would have loved to have seen in the show. Obviously his character gets transferred to Drummer and a few other people, but the actor, I kept thinking about the actor they got in the show and how much he was perfectly cast to play this character.
Yeah.
I was thinking about him throughout the whole entire book.
Yeah, me too.
But
it was his face that I was seeing.
But I this was a shock to me. Bull, he was the lamest part of the book for me. I was just like, whatever. Like, on and on it went. I was just like, oh yeah, Bull, whatever. Like, I didn't give a shit about Bull. I found his chapters the most boring. But then he gets crippled. And we get all of this nuance and all of this stuff that recontextualizes and reframes how he was in the first half of the book, and how it brings all of these qualities that he had in the first half of the book and challenges them and makes him double down on them or disregard some of them, drop them. And by the end of it, I have to say, he was probably my favorite character in the book overall. Anna obviously is fantastic and amazing, and I love her, but I was shocked at how much I actually loved Bull. I was just like, I'm actually kind of sad. I wish he had what Sam had, which was being more books. I kind of wish he had more time, because I just loved how he talked. In terms of just what they would write for him, his dialogue, his internal dialogue, as well as how he would bounce off of his comrades. I loved it.
Oh yeah, I got more excited for his chapters as the book went on.
Yeah.
When it was just chapter whatever, Bull, I'd be like, yeah.
He's probably the one that I'm excited to revisit on a reread. If we ever reread these books, he is definitely one that I will very much appreciate, knowing how his story goes and how his characterization comes into fruition.
I don't feel like it will cheapen anything that comes before it as well, which is a sign of just the caliber of writing that we're dealing with.
And something that was touching about him was his fragility. Because he's the tough security man. He's the Earther, so he's physically more capable than a lot of the Belters. But then he's incapacitated. He has this injury, and he decides, I'm going to keep going because I'm the only one that can do this. If I'm put into a coma, we're all dead.
We're fucked.
And to give the hugest amount of praise to his character and to how they put the character together, I never felt like that was an unearned sense of ego on his part. It felt like he was just genuinely correct.
Main character syndrome much. It's like, oh no, you are the most competent person on the behemoth, and they need you.
And he knew the cost. And yet he was still surprised at how much his body was turning against him as it went on. And the way that they chronicled the deterioration of his physical state as we got later and later in the book, I found to be some of the most, like, not chillings per se, but just like, I don't know, it got under my skin more than, say, vomit zombies, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
it's unsettling because of the truth that's underneath it.
and because it's happening to someone I care about. Like, that's the thing of it all. Like, his skin turning gray and the cough slash laugh slash wheeze getting more and more fluidy and more aggressive as it went on. And I gotta tell you, too, I don't get very, emotional when reading a book or listening to one, but his reaction specifically to when Sam died, that was tough. Like, that's one where it's like, again, if I reread that, that's going to be like an emotional wallop times 10, knowing it's going to come at me. It's just like one of those where it's like, I look forward to the reread of that, but also it will be one where I'm like, ooh, I really don't want to.
As we mentioned before, like in our discussion and various things, there's a lot of differences between this book and the show. And a big part of it is that it's condensed in this series. And, like, Clarissa's revenge is very much streamlined. And I would love to hear from you what you thought about the change from book version of her killing her friend and crewmate to her killing Tilly in the show.
Well, technically, she doesn't kill. She lets Tilly die.
She
That's
lets
the difference.
Tilly die.
Well,
But, like,
he's a huge difference.
She still kills her crewmate. But that isn't.
No,
that isn't the
You want the truth?
It rots away at
It's
her.
supposed to, though. In the show, Ren's death comes back as a thing that haunts her in season 6, but doesn't mean much because we didn't have a connection to him. She didn't have a connection to him that we saw on the screen. We get all of that in the book. Now, I was a little bit gritting of the teeth at the beginning where they're telling us everything up front. Like, she's got the mods, she's going to do this plan, here's who she is. I was a bit taken aback that they're just telling us it all straight up front. But then I remembered I didn't really like in the show that they were hiding it from us because I knew...
Because it was really obvious.
Because it was really obvious. So I think it works better here in the book. My difference of opinion when it comes to Clarissa, because I love all of it. Clarissa in the book, I think she works really, really well. I do miss that the reasonings for why she starts to feel a little bit apprehensive about following through on her plan is because she sees that James Holden is a goofball. Like, I love that in the show. And in the show, she's far more of a Wile E. Coyote and he's the Roadrunner. Here, it's a lot less of that. And so it's more straight-laced and just like obvious in a lot of ways. But my favorite stuff was her and Anna. I think they got a lot more out of her and Anna, especially when we got the POVs of that interaction I talked about earlier where Anna overstepped her bounds. And then we get to hear Clarissa's point of view. And that was my favorite chapter in the book where we just hear Peaches. I'll just keep calling her Peaches. We get to hear Peaches argue with her brain about if she should murder this polite lady or not.
Yeah. That's just like, oh no, it doesn't make sense.
There's people here. You'll get found out. You'll get in trouble. But also, I want to see her brain. And I just want to see the blood squirt out from her head. And it's just like, I thought that was funny, just the way that how she just went about talking about it overall. But my issues or like my things with Clarissa that I have just issues with is in the very back half, her redemption, her turning around of stuff.
Yeah, I felt I feel weird that I felt more about her redemption in the show than in the book. Because I'm not exactly sure right now why it works better for me in the show.
I think it just feels a little less contrived in the sense of she's in the prison next to Ashford and then they team up and she just becomes a bystander for like chapters and chapters and chapters on end. While in the first half or most of the book, she's actively working towards something, even if she has like worries about following through on it. While in the Ashford's in charge and she's just kind of observing and you're just waiting for her to do the right thing. While in the show, there's more justifications, still loose ones, I think, to have Ashford use her. And we see her actually meet James Holden. Like, when they're in the jail cells and she gets to overhear James Holden feeling guilty about not doing enough. So, like, she's actually impacted by the genuine nature of James Holden to change her mind. While in the book, it feels a lot more distant. It feels a lot more abstract. It feels like it's blurred, and she's got the Cortez speaking to her all the time, and he's like a factor.
The reason why she goes nah is, well, I didn't get to kill him, so you don't. Like, that feels much stronger in the book.
Yeah, that does feel a little bit stronger in the book, and also they still have the end result of like she uses her mods to fuck up Ash for like to fuck this over, and then she flips over here and she puts the thing in upside down and it depowers the ship. But although in the book they have a lot more time spent on her learning how to be an engineer and how she learned that, I think in the show her being a bystander in CNC wasn't the case because she was forced to be up there to repair stuff. So there's like more of a justification for her to be fucking around with that. Well, in the book, it's like, you're an asset to us. And she just sits over by security. And then it feels like odd when she has to touch stuff.
Wait for your time. Your plot's not here just yet. Not here just yet. Sit down. Wait for it. Wait for it now.
I mean, how did you feel about the revenge aspect of it? You said it was truncated in the series, but so you feel more favorably towards how it is presented in this?
Yes and no, because the show really conveys exactly what you need it to. It does feel more fleshed out in the book, and it is fascinating to hear those things from her perspective, especially when she's like contemplating killing Anna, and it's just like, what, you fucking that shit.
She feels a lot more sad and deranged in the book. Like, she's both
deranged, but not pathetic in the same way.
No, she's more pathetic in the show. Like, it's hilarious that she can be the most successful terrorist of human history at that point because of the things she does, where she destabilizes 3 governments and makes them almost break out into a war because she's after Holden. But she keeps fucking up actually getting Holden. Well, in the book, it's like that's not really as present of a like humorous failing on her part. It's more like, oh no, she is deranged and she's also very sad. Like, she's sad in the show, but I feel like she's sadder here, especially with the family background. Can I just ask you something real quick? Did you feel, okay, so in your mind, when you watched the show, was Clarissa the younger sister?
I think I thought she was the older one and she was jealous of her younger sister, who was clearly the favorite. And there was this idea of like, at one time, she was acknowledged by her father.
Me too. That's exactly how I thought. And I don't know if it's maybe Nadine Nicole is older than the actress who plays Julie, or the one who plays Julie in the show just has such a like young baby face, because she does, and she has like a very youthful voice. But I thought that too. And then the book has it like she's the younger sister and then, always living in the shadow of her older sister. I kind of prefer what we thought, honestly, as like a sibling, daughter scorned type attitude for her. But the thing that I really wanted to get your opinions on, because we asked for this, we demanded this in the show, and they didn't give it to us. And I even think some of our patrons said that, oh, this doesn't happen in the books. But it did, which is we get to see her on the Rocinante being taken back and her forming a relationship with the crew, including and especially Amos.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. We get him calling her Peaches for the first time. It's very sweet. And it's probably one of the most interesting things that Amos gets to do is to connect with Clarissa and go, okay, well, you know how to do things. I'll change the codes and you're going to come help me.
She is both Clarissa Mao and Melba blended into one because she knows what she did is wrong. She's going to go back home and face the consequences of her actions as Clarissa Mao. But while on the Rocinante, all of these skills that she picked up of being Melba Co come into light, and she's trusted and she forms a bond with not just Amos, but like people like Naomi and Alex and all that feel a bit more warmth towards her because like she's recognizable to them. She's not just the daughter of the bad guy that we fought against last time who did a bunch of evil shit this time round. Like she's, again, it comes back to how there's a lot more of a personal human connection and quality to this book. But it was here, Rachel. And it just further brings up, why wasn't that in the show? If it matters so much that Amos and her have this relationship, we needed to see it form.
Have that moment.
We got it in the book. So when she shows up in book 5 and Amos is like her friend, it will actually mean something, guys. It will actually mean something. Now, a huge difference that or like a part of the differences we got to talk about is Anna stuff, or Anna related, which is her and Cortez. Cortez exists for a start. Like, he was in the show, but he leaves. Like, he's one of the primary antagonists as well. And there's a different angle on, like, the conflict with Ashford, where it's like, in the show, Ashford has, like, his ego and, like, this sense of, like, dying with a purpose, and, like, you feel conflicted because with the information he has, destroying the ring makes sense. And, like, who cares if he's doing it for ego, because in the end he's saving humanity? While in this, it's more Ashford is doing it because he's a prick, but he's hiding behind Cortez, who has a fundamentally different spiritual stance than Anna. How did you feel about all of that stuff? Because it is different, but it's also really, really, really defined in the book. So it is something that wasn't in the show, but do you like it?
I'm not a huge fan of it. Just because, like, it's there and it's important, but it's resolved and not resolved in a way that I was just like, I know. Like, because Cortez just kind of gets away with it. He's not really charged with anything. He has this burden, but he had the burden to start with.
No, he didn't. Not really. He was a man. He was like the top dog guy. Like, he was carefree, but through this experience, he got shaken to his core and it changed him. But then we saw, like, how he went down the wrong path, and now he has to suffer the toll of being
on the wrong side.
On the wrong side of things and losing faith.
Yeah, like there's a lot for him to grapple with, but it doesn't feel like it's going to continue to matter. It's a question that is answered and just goes in another list of facts about religion in the world of the Expanse.
I think it works for this story because this book is much more about the faith side of things and these these musings and what it is to exist and our responsibilities. In the show, that is obviously present, but I feel like it is much more here.
What is the obligation of humanity to itself is a much clearer question being explored in the book.
And having Cortez be this dark mirror warning of what Anna is works really well because in the show, Anna's oppositions are more herself. Like, it's more about like how she cares too much or not enough and like she's abandoned her family and all of that. And that's still present here, but I liked it. I actually liked it. It's one of those things in which Cortez especially, he'll be one that on the revisit, I think I'll appreciate more because I kind of forgot about him until he mattered in the late stage of the story. Like, I'm pretty sure he was like one of the central talking heads we got at the start, yeah? Where we had like the panel of people and we had like the rabbi talking about how this is basically like, using research from Nazi, like from, using evil research. And I think it was Cortez who was like, here you go, bringing up the Nazis again. It's like, I didn't bring up the Nazis, but now that you said that, but by the end, Cortez is the one who's like, hey guys, if we use this ability, it's like he falls into that belief that he maybe stood again. I think that was him. But again, he's one that I find will be cool to come back to. But how, I'm talking about all of this faith stuff. Obviously, I loved it. I'm not a spiritual person myself in real life, but I think it's a completely valid thing to include in narratives, especially ones in this realm in sci-fi and fantasy, because spirituality and faith has been very much tied to the human condition. It's one of the many things we do to survive. It's like we don't understand something, we try and form a reasoning for it. We try and form a cohesive narrative that we can sustain ourselves with. And principles and on it's been here. It's a constant thing that's been popping up throughout humanity, and I think it's totally honest and true to still bring that with us in futuristic settings, but be able to twist it and bend it and examine it. And I love it in the show. I loved it here. But Rachel, when it comes to the use of faith in the book, what was your overall takeaways and opinions on it? Because it is probably the most prevalent thing about Abaddon's Gate.
That's a massive question to ask, Brian. And I am not sure how to answer it, because you're right, that faith is so important in this book in particular. And the way that people use faith as a tool, because it's a way of explaining things and understanding the world. And we see how that can be positive with Anna. We see how it is negative with Cortez. And we see how messy faith in an individual can be with Melba.
And Cortez, like, his belief is interesting. Like, oh, we aren't worthy of it. Like, we need to stop this from happening. And you know who had that opinion in the show? Rachel? Who had the opinion in the show that access to these rings could bring about a new horrible age of humanity. Like, this unknown is scary. Do you remember?
Nah.
It was Holden. Cortez's belief is transferred in part to Holden in the show. Isn't that interesting? Like, what does that make you feel? Like they still, as writers, felt that although Cortez didn't need to be in the show, which I think is fair. Like, I think we already had enough moving pieces in the show. They still wanted to have that viewpoint, that fear, that worry in there, but they gave it to Holden, and in so doing, doesn't that validate it in a way? Because Holden is seen in the series, in the show, as like the voice of reason.
Yeah, it is an interesting move that they're like, we still want to do this, so we're going to move it here.
But in so doing, it's countering what it was before, or at least like changing it, evolving it. Because, like, in the show, you agree with Holden, right? Like, oh, it's going to be a new gold rush, a blood-soaked gold rush. We can't help ourselves. And that's scary. But in the book, when Cortez has that viewpoint, it's like, yeah, it's true, but you don't agree with him. Or, like, you don't side with him, at least. And why is that? Like, why don't you side with Cortez, but you do with Holden in the show? And yet, at the end of the day, they're basically saying the same thing.
My best idea is that it is a little bit more natural with Cortez than it is with Holden. And it feels like it makes sense for a man of faith to be grappling with that. Whereas it feels like it's a side quest for Holden.
But why do we then agree with Holden more than we're willing to with Cortez? Like you say, it makes more natural sense for Cortez to come to these conclusions. Even though he's a man of faith, it seems like it goes against it. But like we follow the steps.
Holden's motivations more than we trust Cortez. Because Holden has continually tried to do what he thinks is best for the universe, and that he's been right in the past. So him questioning this and maybe doing this, it's just like, okay, maybe there is some validity to that. But you don't feel that as much with Cortez because it is presented from a point of insecurity.
Now, the biggest thing that everyone's waiting for, Rachel, we're all waiting for, where's Drummer? Did you see her here? Was she the
No.
captain of the Behemoth?
No.
What was the equivalent character that we had in this? Do you remember? We get this character later in the show, but she's different. It's just her name. Michio Pa.
I'm really glad we knew the Drummer wasn't Drummer going into this. Like, we already had bits of Drummer in the last book.
Yeah, like characters that she consumed. Yeah.
And it is interesting that there's aspects of her, but the Behemoth plot is so different in the show because of that shift of it being Drummer as the captain and Ashford as the second in charge.
Well, in the book, it's the opposite way around. Michio Pa's the second in charge, and it's Ashford that's in charge. Also, Naomi as the engineer on the Behemoth isn't in the book. That's given to Sam, who's a recurring character. And, like, that makes sense. Obviously, it makes more sense, but, like, in the show, it gave more of an interpersonal thing for Naomi and Drummer and Holden and so on, but
more personal stakes.
You know what bugged me? Michio Pa seemed like a really cool character. Like, really cool.
We don't get a lot of her.
She just disappears.
Yeah, and it's just like, is she dead?
And then she's fine. She's there at the end. Okay. Like, oh, okay. Like, Michio Pa seemed interesting at the start. Like, they gave all of this characterization to her, and you can't help but think of Drummer in the show. Like, okay, that's Drummer, basically. And the name's cool, Michio Pa, but then she just disappears. Like, that's probably my biggest critique of the book, is some characters just feel like they like don't exist at certain points, and then they just come back again. Like Ashford,
blink out of existence.
Ashford was that. He's mentioned at the beginning a bunch, but you don't really feel like he's there. And so when he turns up at the end as like the big antagonist we have to fight against, it doesn't feel particularly earned because he didn't feel that relevant to the story other than his angry guy, apparently.
Ashford's book Ashford sucks. And people warned us, and they were really right. They were really right. Because he's just stupid and arrogant. And he just lacks any depth, really. Like, we understand why he's doing things. Like, it's not poorly written. But him as an individual is just a fuckwit.
Well, here's the thing, okay? I'm going to launch into it. He's not as different as I thought he was going to be. So, there's a lot of the Ashford in the show here.
A lot of the flaws are the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they're dialed in differently.
He's just not filled out. He's there. It's like a first draft. So obviously the show version of Ashford gets a lot more characterization, and you feel conflicted because you start to like him in the show. Like at the beginning, he's obvious villain man, but he bonds with Drummer after a certain point, and he takes charge. And the way he goes about things seems very reasonable in the show. Reasonable. In the book, though, here's the thing that I want to really chew on is he that different? Or is it just everyone frames him differently? Because when we spend time with him in the book, he is still framed as like a world-weary former pirate belter who's obsessed with like the iconography and image of what belters should be. He wants the good old days, but wants to change things as well. When the climax of things happens, he takes charge because he thinks he needs to take charge. He's still very, like, intelligent when it comes to, like, the cat and mouse game, like, get the suits and get this. But the show version of Ashford also got highly emotional and piggish and dumb when things didn't work out his way, especially during Drummer and Holden and all of that running around, undermining him, and same with Monica and the broadcast. We still saw that in the show. We still got all of this stuff in the show. The thing that I found to be the huge difference, though, is we got told by every other character that Ashford is a fuck-up, dumbass loser that we shouldn't trust. That's the difference to me, is Bull constantly is like, Ashford, I have to babysit him because he's just so hopeless. He's going to get us into trouble. Same with Michio. Like, Michio's like playing Ashford around because, well, we have to control him because without controlling him, he'll just go off like like a wild beast. He has no abilities, but how do you feel about that stuff? Because that was something I kept thinking of. Like, the version of Ashford we have in the show is somewhat there, but the context of how people react to him is very different.
Nobody has faith that Book Ashford is competent at his job. Like, everybody is just like, really?
Which makes it weird when he gets so many people on his side at the end. because no one's on his side throughout the whole entire story. So when he manages to get people on his side, it feels less true than in the show where he is a famous person. Like, he has a reputation, and throughout the journey of the season, he was currying favor with everyone on the behemoth by undermining Drummer. So when he took charge, it made sense people followed him because he was charismatic. In this book, you're told he's not charismatic. You don't see it. You're told it more, which is weird because then when he's in charge, he leads in a way where people respect him, but yet we were told that they don't.
Yeah. It feels conflicting in a way. Like, what is going on here and why does it matter? Why do I care?
I actually didn't mind. This is going to be the shock. I didn't mind Ashford in this at all. He's nothing as good as the show version. Don't get me wrong.
But he's just kind of nothing.
Well,
you know, we've already kind of said the fact that there's a lack of depth when it comes to his characterization. Ashford is what he does.
He's functional. That's what he is. The idea of him is potentially interesting, and that's where the success of the adaptation is, because they successfully take the idea of what could have worked and bring it to life. There's still some differences. Like, weirdly enough, in the first, act of the book, where he is in charge, he reminded me of Londo from Babylon 5, where it's like, he's this washed up old figure who's yearning for the good old days, but they're far beyond him and they've passed him by. But then when given the opportunity, he's going to fucking ride it. That was there. And I actually kind of liked that. Ashford in the beginning, where he was just like the middle management kind of leader, was just like, you know what they say. I mean, Fred Johnson hears about this, he'll have our asses over this bull, so we've got to do what Michio's saying. Like, I kind of liked Ashford as like a sad little whipping boy, but then when given the opportunity, he's going to fucking go for it. Like, that's interesting. But overall, here's a question. Is he any better or worse or equal to the antagonists we had in the previous books?
I think he's somewhat on par.
On Michio par? I had to.
Moving on.
No. He's more active, though. Like think about Ehrenreich. Think about Mao. Think about, the evil scientist in the first book. Like, Ashford is at least a participant in the story. Not as much as you would want, but he's far more of a participant as an antagonist, but he's just still not very good.
He's competing against Clarissa, so he looks shit by comparison in a different way.
And he's less nuanced than fucking Cortez.
Yeah. But I just want to, I guess, somewhat briefly touch on the changes that they made to Miller in the investigator aspects. Because I feel like in the book, he's not here as much or as frequently.
No.
And he's not as important outside of the key moments where he's making Holden do something. And it was interesting that kind of foil was taken away in the book.
The thing that I kept coming back to was, this isn't Miller. In the show, you were constantly wondering, is this a version of Miller?
How much of this is Miller? How could it be Miller? But in the book, even though they don't outline exactly what the investigator is until very late in the game, it's very clear that it's not much of Miller.
It's what's in Holden's head of Miller. In the show, it felt much more that it was not only that, but what the proto-molecule had consumed of Miller physically. Like, it had, absorbed him
His
into its
brain.
knowledge brain. And like Miller was a ghost in the machine that was fucking things up. So Miller, as well as the program, wanted to investigate this thing. And we kept flicking between Miller and the investigator. In the book, it really is more laid out that, hey, I'm Miller in the sense of what you knew of him. But he does use some phrases that we heard in the first book that Holden never heard. So that is still leaving it up in the air for the discussion that we had in the show of like how much of this is Miller and how much of this is just the proto-molecule using the image of Miller. But yeah, also in the show, no one knew until the height of the drama that Holden was seeing Miller. They all know at the start of this book, like, oh, it's been months and months and months, and like everyone's cool with it. Like, well, everyone in the Rocinante is cool with it, and it's like
just like, oh,
group
okay,
secret.
that's happening.
Yeah, it's like a group secret that we have to not let the documentary crew know that he speaks to an imaginary friend. So that's it. Any other things that you want to go over in terms of like the book itself, the differences, highlights, lowlights, anything else?
I feel like we understand more of the creators now than we did at this point in the show. Even though like the information is very similar, I feel like I have more of a solid grasp of the potential dangers and the sort of idea of what those creatures were like.
Miller tells us it, while Holden interprets it more in the show. Like, I remember Holden came away from the visions. Remember when he had the visions of everything? And he came away with a take on it that I didn't as a viewer. Like, he was like, oh yeah, they had a war with another race and they were destroying the blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, is that what the vision showed you?
I don't really see that, but...
Yeah, like, I guess. But in the book, Miller just outright tells him that. So he has to believe, and that's the thing that I do appreciate of everything we know about the creators and their history is still up in the air because Holden can't trust the person telling him this because this person does lie and does manipulate and like does lead him down trails because it's using him.
Mm-hmm.
So everything we know could still be a partial truth. Like, even Miller talks about that at times throughout these books of just like, you know, it's a part truth. Like, you know, it still is technically not a lie, but we're withholding stuff. How are you with the overall bigger story stuff of these books? Like, are you still driven and interested by them? Are you less so? Because I know in the show we were very middling on it.
Okay, that's happening in the background, but very much is secondary. And it's just like, okay, we're at the end of this first trilogy of books, and we have these certain levels of understanding of the bigger picture of things. And the fact that there are aliens is like several rungs lower than like a bunch of other things. Like the future of humanity and what humanity means is way higher on the priority list.
Yeah, I think that also the lack of like a visual representation, like a thing I'm seeing on the screen, makes it less of a desire for me as someone going through this. I remember I talked to my brother-in-law about, you know, the Expanse show. He stopped watching the show because he's such a fan of the books. He couldn't stand the show being so quick, as he said. And I was explaining like this thing, and I'm like, oh, I got annoyed with like how much they focus on this and the ring builders and all that. And he was explaining to me like, no, that shouldn't be really the focus. It's like, yeah, I get what you say on a verbal level, but like when you're watching a thing and they have Holden standing there in this abstract, like, alien terrain, and he gets messages in his brain. I'm keenly thinking about, like, what does this mean in terms of the huge world building mystery stuff? But in the book, since we've got so much time, it does just fall on the priority list for me as a reader. So that's all I have to say about this one. This is a yum yum.
Yum yum. Yes, it's a firm yum yum. Yum yum. But Ryan, what's the title of the next book?
We are going to be talking about the divisive 4th book. We did not like the season, but I think, Rachel, it's fair to say that we both are very interested in seeing the original source material that 4th season may have perhaps fumbled, which is Cibola Burn. It's just Burn, isn't it? It's not Burns. It's Cibola Burn. And we had a lot of difficulties with the season. And I know that people have a lot of difficulties with the book. But as I just said, we think that we could like the book more just because the things in the show that we know are in the book, we're like, oh, that could be interesting, but we're just not spending enough time with it. The book, hopefully that will remedy that. Are you looking forward to it? What's your overall opinion on that?
I'm intrigued. I am not excited about it, but I think it'll be an interesting experience.
Out of all of the books, it's the one I've been looking forward to the most because I don't know what my opinion will be. Because I feel like with each one of these books, I've kind of accepted what my opinion would be going into it because of the show. Like, the first book, it will be fine, and it was. The second book, it will be a bit better. The third book, it's going to be excellent because I really like the 3rd season, but also I'm excited because we'll get the full story this time. And that's what happened. The 4th one, I don't know. It's just the one I've walked into going, will I love it? Secretly, will I hate it? Or will it make me appreciate things the show did? Or will it make me hate things the show did even more? And then, like, the 5th and 6th book, I'm like, yeah, I have an opinion, I'll probably like those. And obviously the books after will be a mystery to us as we don't know where things go. But enough rambling on. Thank you all so much for listening. Rachel, where can people find the podcast?
They can find us under yumyumpod or yumyumpodcast on those various social medias. They can find us on Patreon, where these episodes get uploaded first. If you want to email us, direct that to yumyumpod@gmail.com. And if you want to show your appreciation, leave us a 5-star review on your podcatcher of choice.
Thank you all so much. It was such a pleasure to sit here and talk about The Expanse again. Can't wait to talk about the next book, in which we will have a POV chapter from that little orphan.
He's got a point, Alex said. That was damn nasty. I just about shot out my intestinal lining, that's true, Amos said, his expression philosophical. But I'd still put that against the captain's coffee farts.